Well, let me just talk a little bit about the IG's office. We are an independent division of the Kansas Attorney General's office. I report directly to the Attorney General. We have statewide jurisdiction to audit, review, and investigate any matter involving the Kansas Medicaid program, CHIP, and Medican. Our completed investigations are referred to various prosecutors for potential prosecution, including the Economic Crimes Unit within the AG's office, but we can also go to district and county attorneys as well as the United States Attorney's Office. I also had the pleasure of testifying each quarter in front of the Bob Bethel Committee. Enjoy that. And just a little background about who I am and the fact that I'm very elderly. But I've been around for a while. I started my military or my law enforcement career in 1989 as a special agent with the Air Force, Office of Special Investigations. Then I went to the General Services Administration, Office Inspector General, where I did construction fraud investigations and employee misconduct. Then I moved to Department of Education, IG's office, and where I did identity theft and various grant fraud investigations. Then I moved to the Department of Labor, where we did labor racketeering, unemployment insurance fraud, as well as workman's comp stuff. Then I moved in 2016. I retired and came to the state of Kansas and worked for the Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Division, doing exploitation, drug stealing, nurse cases, what have you. And then in April of 2021, I was appointed as the IG, and I've been here ever since, and I'm up for reappointment. So any of you senators, please keep that in mind. They'll be voting on me later on. I'd appreciate a yes vote. We provide independent and objective oversight to the government. On the investigation side, we again prevent, detect, and investigate fraud, waste, and abuse. On the audit side, we look for that ways to promote economy, effectiveness, efficiency, and integrity. And also, our office, by statute, shall be independent and free from political influence, which is key. Confidentiality is also really important for an Inspector General's office. Anything that's reported to us by an individual is maintained as confidential. It'd only be released with their permission. That's really important for whistleblowers, and I think that's something that everybody needs to understand. When whistleblowers come forward, they need to be secure in the knowledge that their information will not be put out there and somebody might be told. A lot of our referrals you'll hear about later come from individuals, oftentimes family members, neighbors, people like that. And it's very awkward for them if it gets revealed that their aunt turned them in for Medicaid fraud. So we try to keep that sort of thing under wraps because we don't want that happening. I have a little slide in there from Ben Franklin. I put this in my slideshows for people to just understand that fraud's not a new concept. It's been going on since before the United States was the United States. And he indicates that dishonesty, there is no kind of dishonesty in which otherwise good people more easily and frequently fall into defrauding the government. And I think that's true today, that people frequently defraud the government because they don't see it as being a harmful thing. They're not hurting any individual. They're just hurting the government, and the government's a nebulous thing. I have a list of common Medicaid fraud schemes. Phantom patients is a real common problem. People that are not really patients. The doctor's office has your information, has your Medicaid card. One of the things you have to understand about Medicaid is Medicaid recipients don't get an EOB. If you go see your doctor, what's one of the things you get? You get an EOB, don't you? That tells you what service you received. Medicaid recipients don't get an EOB. So if I'm a corrupt doctor and I'm billing services against your Medicaid card, you have no really way of knowing that because you'll never be told. They also bill for services or goods not provided. We have problems with doctors, and you'll hear about a little bit later. Doctors that are billing 8 days a week, 25 plus hours a day. Mathematically impossible, but yet some of them manage to pull that off. A lot of unnecessary tests. We saw that during the COVID crisis particularly. A lot of testing was done. Kickbacks for referrals. Concealing ownership in related companies is a real problem. If you are a dentist or a doctor, for example, if you're a doctor and you own a hospice company and you're referring people to your owned hospice company, That's a problem doing that sort of thing. If you let the person know, hey, I own 50% share of this hospice company I'm referring your loved one to, that's fine. But if you don't, that's a problem. Of course, double billing, false income or household information for eligibility, we see that a lot. Sharing your Medicaid ID, we see that happen too, particularly in a lot of the communities where you don't have insurance or your neighbor doesn't have insurance, but their child's roughly the same age as your child. So you share your Medicaid ID and they get medical services doing that. And of course, altering records. Have we got it? Excellent. All right. So who commits fraud, waste, and abuse? Essentially, there's normally a transition on this, but state of Kansas employees, providers, beneficiaries, essentially everyone does. It happens across the board. Fraud is just widespread. Anytime there's money that's available, people jump on it. So turning to fraud defined, that's basically an intentional distortion of the truth and an attempt to attain something of value. Does not have to result in a monetary loss. We can do situations, I worked a fraud case many years ago where the person didn't get a cash benefit, but he got the use of a yacht down in Texas, down in Houston, and the captain of the yacht had an American Express card. He was taking him anywhere he wanted, buy anything he wanted, in exchange for he was steering contracts for computers for the Dallas Independent School District to them. So it was millions of dollars worth of fraudulent stuff, but if you went and looked at his bank records, you would not see that he was getting cash payments, because that's what we always think is when we see on TV is an envelope full of cash. No, he got a yacht. In layman's terms, that's basically lying, cheating, and stealing. That's what fraud basically boils down to. What is waste? Well, waste is basically overutilizing a good or service. It also refers to useless consumption or expenditure without adequate return. And it's also the intentional or unintentional careless expenditure, consumption or mismanagement. I frequently will tell people, I had my youngest son finally moved out after he got married. He was waste. He took long showers, he ate all my food, he used the light bill, and after he moved out, every bill in my house went down. So I realized that he was waste because of how he was. So if we can get rid of some of the waste in the government like that, identify those teenage boys, we'd be in good shape. So what is abuse? Well, abuse is excessive or improper use of a thing to employ something in a manner contrary to the natural or legal state's use. It's also basically intentional destruction, diversion, or manipulation of things. Good example of some of the abuse is you use your position for improper gain. We also see sometimes from a waste and abuse standpoint is when we turn in, like in the military is guilty of this, turning in perfectly good equipment to get new equipment. Turning in good computers so we can get the latest computer, turning in a truck that's still serviceable, but we want a new truck, and those type of things are examples of abuse and waste that happen frequently in the government and the military. The one that we see quite a bit, of course, is medical identity theft. That's basically when you use a patient or provider's unique medical identifying information to obtain or bill public or private payers for services. There is an act out there from the federal side that if you get caught doing that, you could face a penalty up to 10 years in prison and a $500,000 fine. We do see this. We see MPI numbers for doctors being used to support durable medical goods, that sort of stuff. So where do we get our allegations from? Hotline. We work with the DCF hotline. We get a lot of referrals through that. You'll hear more about that in a bit. Other Medicaid offices. Private citizens, competing vendors. It's actually kind of funny, sometimes competing vendors want to tell on each other so they can put somebody out of business. And it's just really surprising, but that's how, in a capitalist society that happens. We also hear from other federal and state law enforcement agencies. And jumping back to the private citizens, I talk about this frequently, is that's where we get the majority of our really good referrals from is private citizens. Like I was talking about earlier, the aunt, the uncle, the neighbor, whomever does that. But I tell people, that you have to understand that if you're involved in a fraud scheme and you tell your significant other, the minute you fall out of love with each other, they're calling me. Because when the love's gone out of the relationship, they're calling us. And I get phone calls all the time about, you would not believe what my ex-husband did, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, we have a custody hearing tomorrow. Can you come and arrest him? It doesn't work like that. But that's how we get a lot of referrals like that from people. So what are some of our providers that we deal with? We deal with medical doctors, hospitals, nursing homes, pharmacies, durable medical good places, mental health facilities, drug and alcohol treatment, ambulance companies. Basically, anybody who bills Medicaid is considered a provider. We see it with the home health care, with the direct support workers. Those are considered providers. And those people, there's a lot of fraud in that market because they're just subject to people doing the right thing, and unfortunately some people see it as an easy way to get money. We have people that bill for services they're not providing with the direct support workers, and sometimes we find the Medicaid beneficiary is basically in, use the word cahoots with them, but in conspiracy with them to say, hey, I don't really need the services. You bill, you clock in, you get your check, we'll split the check, and we're both winning, right? And that's a real common fraud scheme that happens in the home health care worker under the waivers program for people who are on like the PD waivers or physical disabled waivers, is those people create a lot of fraud in those arenas. So as far as audits go, how are they selected? We basically get a lot of suggestions from state and federal agencies. We get from the Kansas Legislature, from people just like you. And of course, Medicaid contractors, we hear about things in the news and the media. We hear about audits that are being done in other states, and we're saying, hey, we need to look at that. Discoveries then, of course, from our other audits and investigations, and we frequently, when we're doing an audit, we'll end up seeing 2 or 3 other things like, oh, we need to audit that as well, because that's a problem. We see these other issues. So we frequently are finding things. We have over 40 issues right now that are on tap that we'd love to audit. We just don't have the resources to do it. So that's how that goes. So what are the results of the audit? We make recommendations and suggestions for improvement in quality. We recoup money if possible. We tell the state we don't have the power to do recoupments, but we can point to the state and say, you need to recoup this. We can't force them to do it. We can also lead to investigations for prosecution, and we also identify other audits, and we also put out interim reports. And it's also a really good thing when we can confirm that an agency is performing with quality and efficiency. That's a real plus when we go in and say, you know what, you're doing a really good job. Here's the best practice that you're doing. Keep it up and share that with other people. That is a real plus. I've got a list of audit reports I'm going to go through that our office has done. I want everybody to understand too, prior to April, when I came on as IG, we really didn't have much of a program. We had the prior IG, Sarah Fertig, was there for just a very short time. The office didn't really have much going on. And when I took over the office, we only had 2 people. I had an auditor and a analyst to do things. We have since grown now. There's a total of 10 people in our office, and we still don't have anywhere near what we should. Because, Medicaid is a $5.5 billion program, and when you think about it, most experts will throw around different numbers, but some as high as 20%, some a little lower than that, but I just use 10%. If you think about Medicaid being a $5.5 billion program, if 10% of that is lost to fraud, that's over $500 million per year in the state of Kansas. That's not worldwide, nationwide, it's just the state of Kansas is potentially lost to fraud. So here's an audit that we did on looking for Medicaid claims for beneficiaries that exceeded the 12-month lifetime limit. For Medican, which is a state-only program, there's no federal money in that. It's 100% state-funded. We found out that $1.6 million of Medicaid claims were paid for these people for 912 beneficiaries who had exceeded the 12-month lifetime limit. That's a hard 12-month limit, no question about it. As a result of our review, KDHE staff began the process of removing 556 people who were still on there. They're no longer eligible, and resulted in a savings of $1.2 million. We did another audit on situations where capitation payments, which are the payments that go to the managed care organizations, that were done for people who were dead. Some of them had been dead for 5 years, and we were making payments for them. And we identified $1.3 million in capitation payments that were made for 25 beneficiaries whose dates of death had been a long time. That money was recouped. I do know that for a fact. It was recouped. We then did an audit on the HCBS program, that's Home and Community-Based Services. And we found that for the period of the audit for 40 months, we found there were over 2,000 people who were enrolled in there, but did not have claims for more than a 12-month period. You're supposed to be eligible for the waiver, you have to receive 1 service per month. That's a program requirement. It's hard, fast, there's no question about it. And we found all these individuals who didn't have services for lengthy periods of time. Some of them never had services during the 40-month period. The MCOs didn't report it to the state. The state did not identify it with their own programs. Resulted in capitation payments of $193 million being made to those MCOs. When we identified that to KDHE, their response was, well, it would take an awful lot of work to go back and look at it, and we only have a 3-month look-back period, so we couldn't go back and recover all that money anyway. And it's like, why do you have a 3-month look-back period? Well, you know, the contracts are risk-based, and that's to weigh the difference between them taking on the risk and our situations. Basically, they set themselves up where there's no chance of recovering a dime of that money, and they never did. That's money that could be recovered or should have been recovered. We also, as part of that audit, we looked at a situation with the Life Alert bracelets. We found there were 560 people who the only service they were getting was Life Alert. Now, bear in mind that when people are on a waiver, they're only supposed to be on the waiver if it's going to keep them out of an institution, like a nursing home or assisted living or something like that. It's designed to keep them where they can live in their homes and be comfortable. Providing Life Alert services for them, it ended up us paying over $8 million in, again, capitation payments, which are like insurance payments, to the MCOs. We looked at it. The same service could have been, if we'd paid for it through fee-for-service, through KDHE, what it cost us $55,000. Instead, we paid over $8 million. We then did a performance audit on out-of-state residency, which is a real problem. People move out of state. Even during the PHE, when people couldn't be kicked off of Medicaid in the state of Kansas, if you moved out of state, you still could be removed from the system, all right? We found out the KDHE did not have adequate protocols or guidelines to confirm if a person had moved out of the state. That was an issue that we talked about it with them, and resulted in approximately $1.3 million in capitation payments went to the MCOs for people who are no longer living in Kansas. And I've talked about this before in Bethel. Kansas does have one really good thing going forward. People really love Kansas Medicaid. They'll move to Missouri or Oklahoma or someplace like that, and they try to hang on to their Kansas Medicaid because it provides more services. It's a better product than our neighboring states are. So we're kind of victims of the quality of our Medicaid program. So people will move over into Missouri, and they'll hang on to it, and they'll lie about their address to keep their Kansas Medicaid at all cost. I also understand that Oklahoma Medicaid is really difficult to get on. Yes, ma'am.
Ask you a real quick question there, if I may. So was any of that 1.3 ever recouped?
No.
And Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to follow up on that, are there any provisions in place that if you discover that someone lives out of state, do they just get removed from the Medicaid, or is there any sort of way to go back and recoup?
The state of Kansas does not recoup from beneficiaries who commit fraud. We would have to prosecute the individual. We have some cases you'll hear about in a little bit of individuals have moved out. We're attempting to prosecute them. That's the only way we can recover money. CMS also has rules on that prevent the states from recovering through administrative processes. I suspect with the new administration coming in, that rule will go away because that was a newly placed on rule. So we can do that. But if we criminally prosecute somebody, we can recover the money through restitution. But you have to understand, a lot of times there's not a lot of money to be had there. But we look at it as a success if we're able to stop the hemorrhage. Because when we identify these people, they immediately get kicked off of Medicaid because they're clearly not eligible for Kansas Medicaid. And I want to be abundantly clear here. Medicaid's a program that helps a lot of people. I do not want to kick people off Medicaid who deserve it, who need it, should have it. But people who are abusing the system should be removed. So we see it as a victory whenever we're able to remove somebody off of Kansas Medicaid who's not eligible. They should be in the other state, or they've since gotten a job that would prevent them from being eligible. Those are issues that we consider. Understand that the average monthly capitation on average in the state of Kansas is $818 per month per person. It varies. Some people, if you're in good health and young, your capitation may only be $200 a month. But we have people who have capitations that are $9,000 and $10,000 a month if they have a lot of health problems. So on average, it's $818 per person per month that we pay for every beneficiary. And there's approximately 457,000 people on Medicaid in the state of Kansas right now.
Okay, so my next question would be, do you kick them off immediately, as you said, or is there some sort of grace period, like, hey, we found out you live in Missouri, you've got 30 days to find a new plan, or is it just, hey, you're done?
No, I appreciate the question, sir. We work with KDHE. They go through their process. The person's notified that we are seeing a situation with this, and you're going to be removed at the end of the month. And they give them, I think, a 10-day or grace period. So if it's like on the 28th, they won't kick them off the next day, but they'll let them know that your benefits are going to end, and then they're welcome to appeal that. So there are checks and balances in place so that if somebody said, oh, yeah, wait, hold on a minute, I've moved back in Kansas, or this is being seen wrong. Now, we obviously try to make sure our information is really solid, but there's a Paris report, which is a matching report that goes around every state entity that reports on that. That's where a lot of these come up is we find people who are enrolled in Medicaid in 2 or 3 other states. We had one guy he was enrolled at 8 different states at the same time. So.
Senator Alley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the audit report where it said on the last sentence there, you show $1.5 million in payments to MCOs. Is there anything that happens to the MCO?
Well, they should have the money recouped. That's my desire, my opinion. It's up to KDHE to do that. Again, I don't have the power to do that. This has been a topic that's been raised. If only the time they'll actually do a KDHE will do a recoupment from the MCOs is if the person has passed away. But otherwise, they do not attempt to do recoupments because they have this 3-month look-back period that they arbitrarily placed upon themselves. I'd like to see that removed.
Thank you.
So how often, that begs the question, someone moves out of Kansas and they're on 2 different state plans. How often are eligibility for benefits determined?
Well, they do once a year. They do that. And, if you get determined eligible like last month and then you move out of state, they won't catch you again for another year. And KDHE does an awful lot of what they call passive reviews. So they'll send you a letter. And if you do not send it back saying, hey, I've moved or my circumstances have changed, they just assume that everything's good and on you go. So they don't get their eligibility considered.
Why wouldn't we, what's the obstacle to redetermining those benefits more frequently? Every 3 months, so we're not paying someone for 12 months who's moved to another state. What are the obstacles to doing that?
Well, part of it is CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. That's the federal government. That's the overlord. And they put some of those rules out there on the states, and they threaten their FMAP money if they don't comply with it. And they encourage them to do these super passive reviews. What we try to do is when we get complaints in, we send them to KDHE and say, hey, this is that. And at that point, they're able to review that person, and they can make a determination then.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there a list of bad actors, the people, you talked about the one guy who was signed up for 8 states, so that they are just automatically, hey, you've defrauded us in the past, you're not going to get any more benefits?
Well, that's another unfortunate thing with the Medicaid programs. You cannot permanently remove somebody from the Medicaid system. They get kicked off for a year, and then they're eligible to get right back on.
Is there any legislation we could do to, or again, we're trying to usurp CMS?
That's right.
Okay.
And again, with the new administration coming in, I think you're going to see a tightening of some of those rules. The previous administration was doing things to make it easier for people to get on and stay on Medicaid, whereas I think the incoming administration may very well make some modifications to that.
Those are great questions in committee. I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure when those federal changes are made that they are reflected in our state practice. So we will be trying to monitor that as close as possible. Other questions? Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This backs up to early on. You talked about the EOB that they don't get. Is there a way to do that, or does that create a problem? I mean, they're already doing it for insurance and Medicare and everything like that. You would think.
It would have to be written into the contracts for the MCOs, that requiring them to do that. It's not in the contract.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Do we have an aggregate number of how much fraud, each one of these 1.3, 1.5 million, do we have a total number of how much we're losing to fraud in the Medicaid system every year?
Well, like I said, different people will give you different estimates. I think KDHE testified last year, they considered it to be around 6%. I think it's low. I always use a rule of thumb of 10%, but other analysts that testified last year said it's upwards of 20% of it. So I like 10% because it's easy, and that's where you get the $550 million for that. And it's, when you think about it as a percentage, well, 10% is not that big of a deal, but when you apply it across 5.5 billion, then suddenly it adds up to a lot of money.
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Seeing no other questions, please proceed.
All right, thank you. We looked at the TransMed program, and that's a program where people can be on it for no more than, it basically terminates after 12 months. And it's a really good program. It basically allows people who are currently on Medicaid to go out and find a job, to hang on to their Medicaid benefits for a while, and while they transition back into the work life and get insurance. There's a lot of places your insurance doesn't start until you've been on board for like 6 months or more. So it's a good program. The problem is we found that there were people that had been on it for a really long time, and so we ended up finding out that over $16 million in capitation payments had been made for over 2,000 individuals who had far and away exceeded the 13-month thing. Some of them had been on there since 2015. And we did a little bit of a follow-up with them just to see if they were taking our advice, and we found that 580 people were still on the program after we'd identified it to them. It cost us another $1.5 million in capitation. So the most recent audit that we've released involves the continuing care provider regulations and CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities. Bed tax is a situation where they consider it a quality care assessment, but a lot of people in the industry call it a bed tax. The bed tax for certain facilities, if you're above 45 beds, those sort of things, it's $4,908 per bed per year. And if you get the reduced rate, it's $818 per bed per year. That's a substantial savings, over $4,000 per year. So there's an inducement to do it. And it talks about there how you can be considered that if you have less than 46 beds, or if you have more than 25,000 bed days, et cetera, or if you're designated as a CCRC. And a CCRC is supposed to be a facility that has like assisted living, and it allows you to basically, when you're ready to get a little bit of help, move into a community and then transition through. And facilities that did that years ago when they first came up with the bed tax were able to negotiate to get where they could get the lower rate if they were designated as a CCRC. So during our audit, we found out that a large number, 68% of the registrations, were not in compliance with state of Kansas regulations or statutes on the issue. And it resulted in us improperly issuing these CCP registrations for people, and we lost QCA revenue of $87 million. What happens on this is kind of a unique deal, is the bed tax is put into a fund or an account, if you will. And then we tell the federal government, hey, here's all this money that for bed taxes that we have this expense, and then the Fed comes in and gives them $1.50 per dollar that we have in there. So every year we want to have the same amount that we go and tell the federal government and give us this. So because of facilities figuring out the CCRC thing, they have been, more and more of them have getting the lower amount, so they've had less money going into the QCA account that has to be made up or supplemented out of the state general fund. So it's all state general fund money that's going into this. And we found out that facilities that absolutely had no continuing care at all resulted in an estimated $33 million in QCA revenue that the state of Kansas had to pull out of its own pocket to put into the fund to get the full federal match. We also estimate that $12 million could be saved in the upcoming fiscal year with some changes being made. And to the question about, is there something we can do, we suggested legislation last year that was put into play, and it was put into the 2024 legislative session. It was approved by Governor Kelly on May the 10th, that moved the process for looking at these facilities from the Kansas Department of Insurance to KDADS. And consequently, we're already seeing facilities that are no longer claiming to be CCRCs So we're seeing a monetary savings. My auditors are looking at it. We're right now in the transition period, so it's hard to get firm numbers, but we think we're going to probably save several million this year, and the next year we'll save that full $12 million. And again, it's not us going and recovering money, but it's basically stopping the flow, and anytime you can save money, that to me is a win when you do that. Just want to quickly talk about complaints and investigations. In calendar year 2024, we processed 1,454 complaints that came into us. 1,318 of them involved eligibility fraud. 22 were non-eligibility fraud. That's typically like identity theft and things like that, or people who weren't falsifying their identity, but maybe other issues or their eligibility. 76 involved providers and contractors. We had 1 state employee and 1 state agency involved, and 36 did not involve Medicaid and referred to the correct agency. We also opened 105 investigations, and because of our investigations, finding like people who moved out of state and stuff like that, we identified $236,000 in savings and recoveries as a result of that. We had 1 case specifically where an individual was in a nursing home. She got an inheritance. That money's supposed to go to pay for her care. Instead, her daughter, who was her durable power of attorney, tried to steal the money, and we got that stopped and got $140,000 back on that, and it went to where it's supposed to be. So that was definitely a hard recovery there, where we pulled back $140,000 and got it put to the right place. So of our cases, 81 involve beneficiary fraud, eligibility-wise, 12 providers and 1 state employee. And we've also closed 27 cases for various reasons. And I want to invite anybody. My contact information's on here on the last slide. It's got my email address, my direct phone number. Please don't abuse them. Don't give it to just anybody. But it's also got a QR code that people can click on, and that will direct you to our website, where you can find every audit report, every annual report, anything you want to know about the Medicaid Inspector General's office is available at that QR code or at that address on there. I'd love to answer more questions if you have them.
Committee, other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. This was very, very good. With you mentioned the FMAP, the requirements that hoops we have to jump through to obtain that that money, federal matching money. Is there? I'm assuming there's an awful lot of inefficiencies there that we could be looking at. Is any of that statutory, or is it, again, is it how we deal with the feds on this?
Well, sir, you're right. Some of it is there's some inefficiencies there. FMAP, the federal government puts a lot of rules on how the state handles things. I do believe there's some things that we can do. My office would love to look at more of them. I have 3 auditors right now, 2 analysts and 2 special agents and an investigator. We have a full docket of things we're doing. We have 2 audit reports we're getting ready to issue. One's on pre-authorizations for that the MCOs have, the process that's making it very difficult on a lot of our hospitals. That report's going to be issued here pretty shortly. And we also have an audit report that's coming in on schools. And schools, get over $25 million a year in Medicaid to provide services to children at school. And we're paying for that through fee-for-service. And I don't understand why the MCOs aren't paying for that, because we're already paying the MCOs to provide Medicaid services for these kids. So, so we're wanting to see what's going on with that. We're finding a lot of problems with the MPI numbers. There's a lot of providers out there who have MPIs, and CMS is responsible for issuing MPI numbers. We found out that they do absolutely nothing to verify the credentials of anybody who's registering for an MPI. Anybody could apply for an MPI and get it, and then hold yourself out there as a doctor. There was actually an individual here in Kansas that got his own MPI number and was able to write himself a script for medication. So
Yeah.
there's just,
Sounds like there's some things we can look at and actually accomplish here
Yes,
with
sir.
legislation.
yeah, there would be, and having a portal, I don't know if that's something that the committee's considers, having like a hotline or a portal where people can get on to report things would be useful, and we would be happy to do whatever we can to assist in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm glad you mentioned that. There is going to be a government efficiency portal. It is in the works. We thought we would have it about 2 weeks ago, making sure we're getting all the legalities worked out. That will be available for anyone to report any government efficiencies that we can then pass on to the appropriate people. But there is going to be a government efficiency portal available very soon. So thank you for mentioning that. So committee, other questions? Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that report. It's amazing. When we talk about budgets and finding this extra money and the savings that we're going to have next year, talk to me about what that looks like. Are we then going to adjust how much money we're giving Medicaid? Does that money get saved? Does it become unencumbered? Or do we just say you're not getting that 12 million?
I don't have any control over that. Appreciate the question. I don't have any control over how the Medicaid gets budgeted to the state. On that, I mean, they have what they have as far as people who are eligible. And, you know, the eligibility numbers go up and down. Obviously, during the PHE, eligibility numbers went up, but post-PHE, the numbers have gone down some, people who were removed. But we still have a lot of people on Medicaid, and nothing's going to change that anytime soon. Obviously, if Medicaid expanded, we'd have a huge bump up with that, but I don't see that happening. I don't think that's for you guys to decide. So,
Thank you.
Other questions? So this is a huge problem. I mean, look at the amount, look at the number of people who are defrauding. I love how you put it, lie, steal, cheat. I mean, things we teach our children not to do that apparently adults are ignoring. Can you kind of just break it down, like how much have you been able to save through your efforts? And here's the $64,000, 64 million, 100 million, it looks like. Question, if you had the staff and resources, how much do you think you could, that is under our purview currently with the current federal laws and regulations, how much is under our control that we're losing, and given the resources, could you recover?
well, I don't think I'm even touching 1% of the fraud that we think might be out there. I realize it'd be impossible for us to all save the whole 550 million, but I'd like to take a swing at it. We could do more. You know, since I've been in this role, we have saved or identified approximately 299 million in wasteful spending, another 6 million in overpayments, 29, and we've identified 24 million in potential savings. We've also identified 34 findings and made 83 recommendations. And a lot of our recommendations nothing happens with them. And that's a common problem for a lot of IGs, is they make recommendations to the agencies that they work with, and very little happens with those recommendations. And that may be something that during the Bethel Committee, they sometimes will talk to them about some of the issues. And there has been some changes made as a result of our work, but more could be done.
So is there any incentive for the agencies to take your recommendations? For example, if we said, you make these steps and save money, and then you get to benefit from keeping 10% of what you save. Is there any incentive for agencies to do this other than it's the right thing to do and be good stewards of taxpayer money? But there's no other incentive, correct?
I'm not aware of the MCO or the state having that. I do understand the MCOs, if they identify fraud and stop it, they do get a financial incentive for doing that. I mean, one of the other issues that we are faced with is the food assistance program, SNAP, TANF, what have you. A lot of times the people who are committing fraud in Medicaid are also committing fraud in those programs. And we are working joint cases with the food assistance people right now. We had put a bill forward last year to attempt to get us access so that we can help enforce those laws and audit those programs. And we didn't get all the way out of committee. And we're trying to push that forward again this year, and hopefully to allow us to have that access so that we can work more closely with the food assistants, because we see that that's an area where we could identify more fraudsters if our agencies had a better working relationship, and if we had authority to look at those programs and include it. Because right now we can't pursue it. It has to be a joint effort. And the food assistance side of it, they do not have criminal investigators. They have investigators, and I'm not trying to knock them, but you need special agents to do certain law enforcement activities, and they just don't have the ability to do it.
Sounds to me like there's some opportunity legislatively to put some requirements on agencies to enact recommendations that would create efficiencies. So I'm going to challenge this committee to look at those things and how we can assist. I'd also be interested, just doing some basic math, the return on investment for your 10 on your staff and what you identify in the potential savings. I looked at that as an investment. And I would, want to take a look from this committee on further investments in this office to identify and recover and stop some of the unnecessary waste and abuse in our system. Senator Thomas and Senator Holscher.
Thank you so much. My question is this. So there were several instances in here, and the alert bracelets are one, where it wasn't so much a person committing fraud, it was just the fact that it was set up through an MCO versus maybe more of a direct system, correct?
Yes, Senator, that's
Okay.
correct.
So if I'm understanding correctly, some of the fraud or some of the waste is more through, not so much people, but you're seeing it more so through how some of these contracts are set up and
Yes.
those specifics.
And that's something that we thought could be easily remedied, but KDHE decided not to take advantage of that.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Other questions? Committee, I hope thank you so much for being here. I'm sure that we will have many more questions. Thank you for the contact information. Committee, I hope that this has been helpful just as a jumping off point as far as the scope of what we're dealing with and the opportunities that we have as a committee to address some of this and become more efficient. So seeing no other business, we are working Senate Bill 13 tomorrow, so please be ready with questions as we hear that. We're going to have a hearing on that tomorrow. So seeing no other business, we are